The story begins with the main character remembering his past life. He realizes that his old life was very boring and tiring. Every day he would push through crowded trains after work, living the same routine without any change. Then when he opened his eyes again, he found that he was no longer in the old world. He was now in a completely new body, the body of a small child. He quickly ran toward the window, where he stood looking with curiosity at the huge and fancy capital city that stretched out before him. At that moment, his personal maid Zio felt scared for him since he was still very young and standing near the window, which could easily put him in danger. But the real shock was that this child, who was not even 2 years old yet, could speak normally. This child was Van Vetti, who after being reborn had kept all his memories and knowledge from his past life. His maid Shio continued to take care of him because he belonged to the Marquis Vetti family. He was the youngest son with 3 older brothers. When it was time for the meal, the atmosphere inside the dining hall became very formal and well organized. Each person stood with their personal servant behind them. The 3 sons took their seats one after another, starting with the third son Sesto, then the second son Yan, and finally the eldest son Mia. The main seat was taken by Mark Jabba, the head of the family. As for Van, because of his young age, several servants surrounded him and carefully took care of him and fed him. During the meal, Mark Jabba asked in a serious tone what each of them planned to do that day. Each of them answered with hesitation. When it was Van's turn, he answered calmly that he wanted to learn the culture and history of the state first. This answer immediately shocked his brothers because a 2-year-old child should not be able to think like that. At that moment, Mark Jabba laughed loudly, pointing out that his young son, whom his wife Mira had left behind, had amazing intelligence. Marquis Jabba placed great hope on Van. He wished for him to inherit powerful fire magic like his parents because if that happened, the future of the Vetti family would be completely secure. He was eagerly waiting for the magic element appraisal ceremony when Van reached the age of 10 because that moment would decide his fate in this world. In this world, the elemental magic system of fire, wind, water, and earth plays a very important role in protecting territories. Rare elements are often considered a disgrace to the family. At this point, Mary's Jabba and all of his sons already had magic from one of these 4 basic elements. Later, when Van returned to his room, he was very curious about this new world he was living in. Anything he did not understand, he would immediately ask the maid Shia about, whether it was about territorial borders or the different races that existed in the world. Despite his young age, Shio explained complex ideas to him which made the other servants warn her. But Van did not care about that at all. His only goal was to gain as much knowledge as possible. He even personally asked to start learning magic at an early age. These unusual actions made all the servants see him as a genius. The head servant Espada began to watch Van closely and give him special attention. After a short time, Espada brought him a stack of books that covered letters, numbers, and basic knowledge. As the head servant who had served the family for many years, his strict personality created a clear pressure that Van could strongly feel when he was near him. He started with simple questions like addition using fingers, which were extremely easy for someone who kept the memories of his past life. Yet Van answered with a bit of tension. Soon after, Espada declared that he would personally take charge of his education. From that moment on, the lessons continued day after day, gradually becoming very harsh, almost like a hellish training for a small child. But through that, Van managed to learn reading and writing while gaining a large amount of basic knowledge. Time passed quickly over 2 years until he reached the age of 4. After that, Shio began training him in swordsmanship. She often teased him because of his small body and limited strength. This made the other servants unhappy because they saw such behavior as an insult toward the young master. Some of them even said that executing her would not be unfair. They all demanded that she be punished for her lack of respect. Facing this situation, Shio felt extreme fear and began to cry, but Van understood what was happening. He stepped forward with a calm expression and lightly tapped her forehead with his finger, saying that this was the punishment and that the matter was over. When some of them objected, Van confirmed that this was enough and that there was no need to make the situation bigger. During that time, because of his daily sword training with persistence, he became at the age of 5 capable of facing young soldiers older than him. Although his movements were simple because he was a child, his opponents could not defeat him. The experience he kept from his past life gave him a clear advantage, making him seen as a rare genius in swordsmanship. From that moment, he became known as a prodigy child, different from many nobles and even from his own brothers. Van treated everyone with kindness without distinguishing between servant or worker. This earned him the respect of those around him. The family sword instructor noticed calluses and small wounds on Van's hands, clear signs of his intense training. When he learned that Espada made him study 3 times more than an ordinary person, he showed visible shock, noting that this explained how harsh the lessons were. Elsewhere, the instructor offered to personally train Van in swordsmanship. Although Van showed his love for the sword, he did not wish to abandon his studies, so he decided to balance between the two. The instructor promised to make the training slightly lighter because of his young age, but the reality was different. The exercises, such as swinging the sword and thrusting it hundreds of times daily, were extremely exhausting and no less difficult than his studies. On the other hand, the instructor was so strict that he even told Van how to sit during rest, forcing him into extremely tiring positions that were hard to even look at. The only person who treated him with kindness during all of this was Shio. Even so, through these harsh days of training, Van began to feel that his life in this world had become enjoyable and carried far more meaning than his past life. He truly started to enjoy his time. When he reached the age of 6, he became widely known by the title of the prodigy child, a title that had followed him since his birth. However, the harsh days of study and training, which repeated day after day, began to make Van feel exhausted. Although the situation was somewhat acceptable at the beginning and he still had time to enjoy his daily life, with the passage of time, his schedule became extremely crowded. Soon, any time in which he could rest or relax disappeared completely. In the end, he could no longer endure it. So Van asked to go out and wander outside because he wanted to see the market of this world with his own eyes. He decided to live just one day as a normal child. We moved to the market where the place was very crowded with shops lined up next to each other and people moving in every direction within the heavy crowd. The market was full of life. It was the largest market in the city, housing the main headquarters of the Merry Trade Guild, the largest trade guild in the entire region within the kingdom. While Van stood there amazed by the scene, he suddenly noticed a small child bound with ropes being dragged through the street, as if he were goods being sold. At that moment, his guards became alert. Van asked why the old man was treating the child so cruelly. He was told that the child was his son and that he was selling him as a slave. Shio calmly explained to him that very poor families are sometimes forced to sell their children as slaves when they cannot support them. During that time, a girl came out from the trade guild building. When she noticed the noble presence surrounding Van, Shio quickly introduced him, explaining that he was the prodigy child and the youngest son of a mayor's, while also showing the family crest as proof. The girl was called Rosalie, who belonged to the trade guild and showed great happiness upon meeting him. He asked her about the price of that slave child. After she explained that the child had a weak magic element known as the theft element, she mentioned that the highest price he could reach was 3 large silver coins. Upon hearing that, the old man's anger flared up and he grabbed the child and began beating him harshly, venting his anger because of the lack of money. When Van saw this scene, he immediately decided to buy the child for 5 large silver coins and paid the amount at once. Only then did the old man leave the place. Van approached the child, cut the ropes that bound him, and greeted him calmly. The child's name was Cam Shin. Van told him that he was now free and could go anywhere he wished. Shio was surprised and asked whether he had bought him to become a slave, but he clarified that he only wanted to save him. Then he asked him whether he had a plan for what he would do next or whether he wished to live with him. At that moment, the guards intervened and explained that the Maris would not allow a child of unknown origin into the mansion unless he had the status of a slave. Van apologized to Kamshin and asked him whether he would accept becoming a slave in that case. Kamshin agreed immediately without hesitation and was extremely happy. Rosalie offered to help them complete an official magical slave contract. Van was slightly surprised because he did not know the details, but he held Cam Shin's hand and went with her. Once the magic was activated, a mark appeared on the back of Cam Shin's hand, confirming that Van had become his master until he himself decided to cancel the contract. The contract fees were completely waived because this was the first time Van had used the services of the trade guild. Van thanked Rosalie, which surprised her because it was not usual for a noble to thank an ordinary merchant. After that, Van took Kamshin with him and bought him new clothes. Then they returned to the mansion. After several days, Kamshin came to Van and told him that Master D was looking for him for an important matter. At that moment, Van gave him a piece of cake as a bribe and asked him to tell anyone that he was not present. Van noticed that Kamshin was not wearing gloves, so he asked him why. Kamshin replied that he saw no need for them because while serving Van there was nothing to be ashamed of or to hide, but rather he considered that a source of pride. At that point, Van told him that the gloves were among the things he had personally bought for him, so Kamshin wore them immediately without hesitation. Shortly after, Uncle D appeared and confirmed that he had seen Van entering the place, but Kamshin insisted that he was not present, making the situation seem strange. Kamshin replied calmly that it might have been just an illusion, but when D noticed the crumbs of cake on the ground, he immediately realized that he had been bribed. So he laughed and said that ignoring the orders of the vice commander was not something simple. Kamshin answered honestly that he only listened to the orders of Master Van. This response greatly impressed Dai. When he saw his courage and firmness, he decided to personally train him instead of Van, as if he wanted to bring out all of his hidden potential. Time passed and Van became 8 years old. At that stage, the time for the magic element determination ceremony had arrived. The entire city spoke of the ceremony and everyone was curious. Van had long been known for his kindness, making many people look forward to the day he would become their ruler. According to the traditions of the Vedi family, its members usually awakened fire or wind magic, but Van's result was shocking. He had no primary element and instead awakened production magic, a type considered weak because it required raw materials to create anything. This magic was commonly used for crafting weapons or ornaments, things ordinary craftsmen could make. This enraged Jabba, who demanded how such an ability could protect the people. Since all family members had powerful combat magic, having a son with production magic was seen as a disgrace. In his anger, he declared his mistake in trusting Van, drew his sword and nearly killed him. At that moment, Mia intervened and stopped him. He proposed that Van be sent to govern a small village within their territory, a place of little value. It was surrounded by danger and near a hostile border where the people lived in instability. Jabba accepted the idea and appointed Van as its ruler, forcing him to leave while praising Mia for making use of someone he deemed useless. The shock was heavy. Mia apologized, explaining it was the only way to save him. But Van calmly thanked him, saying he owed his life to him. Mia promised to help as much as he could while Zio was furious at the injustice. Yet Van accepted the situation, even feeling curious about ruling the new village. Preparations were made quickly and his belongings were loaded onto a carriage. But surprisingly, no official knights accompanied him. Secretly, Mia had arranged for 10 adventurers as protection, making sure Van was not left alone except for Cam Shin, which eased his worries. Zio chose to follow him, unwilling to remain behind. Dee joined to continue his sword training, bringing 2 guards. Espada asked for early retirement to accompany him, becoming responsible for his studies. Although Van felt they would leave him no time to rest, he still carried both relief and unease. The carriage had no family crest as his father wished him to leave quietly. But before departure, a girl ran after them and it became clear that Dai had announced his departure openly. Because Van was loved, many people gathered to say goodbye to him, wishing him well and placing their hopes on him. This gave him courage for the journey ahead. During the trip, Van tested his production magic by creating a small knife. He realized that despite its simplicity, it had practical use. Before reaching the village, he allowed Cam Shin to return and canceled the slave contract. But Cam Shin refused, promising lifelong service and even his life for him. This deep loyalty embarrassed Van greatly because Cam Shin's respect bordered on devotion. At that moment, the carriage suddenly came to a stop. Van quickly informed the guards that the village ahead was under attack, and that the attackers were likely bandits or experienced mercenaries. Van analyzed the situation calmly, realizing the village wall would not last long against arrows while the villagers stayed inside in full defense. After a quick look, he estimated the enemies to be around 50. Uncle Dai wanted to join the fight, but Oho warned him against acting recklessly, reminding him their role was protection, not risking their lives. While Dai insisted he could at least push the bandits back. Unable to accept the village's destruction from the first day, Dai suggested ensuring Van's safety, which everyone agreed on. Then Espada stepped in, refusing to risk D and proposing a plan. Build a defensive wall, let the adventurers attack from behind, then strike from the side once the enemy is distracted. But Van refused, using Espada as bait because losing people like him or D would ruin any chance of developing the land. In the end, he made his decision. He would be the bait. Everyone was shocked. Shio objected strongly and insisted on going with him, while Cam Shin offered to take his place, but Van refused, unwilling to sacrifice anyone important to him. He declared he would drive the carriage straight toward the enemy while the others attacked from both sides. He added that his daily training with D made him confident, and if needed he would sacrifice himself for his people as their ruler. At that moment, O remembered their first meeting, realizing Van was nothing like arrogant nobles, as he had shown humility and genuine respect. This made him decide to support him fully along with his team. Barl admitted they never trusted nobles before. But Van was different, even memorizing their names, which made them willing to risk their lives for him. Dai confirmed that protecting Van meant protecting the future of the family, while Espada emphasized his duty to instill that responsibility in him. The plan was executed immediately as Espada created defensive walls while the teams took positions. Once the bandits fired arrows, counterattacks quickly reduced their numbers as their leader tried to shift tactics. D launched a direct assault while Oho attacked from the other side, forming a perfect pincer that blocked escape routes. Under pressure, the bandits began retreating, but their leader rushed forward recklessly toward the wall. At that moment, Van appeared with great speed, striking from behind with a fatal blow. Cam Shin followed up, finishing the enemy with a decisive strike. This left Barl shocked by Van's true strength. Soon after, all remaining bandits were captured, and the team achieved a perfect victory without losses. Oho originally planned to leave, but after seeing Van's decisions, he chose to stay and help. Some members left and others remained out of curiosity to see how this young ruler would develop his land. Meanwhile, Shio was still worried but calmed down after the battle ended safely. The villagers gathered at the gate and Van stepped forward as their new ruler, greeting them with respect. The village chief L thanked him and explained that bandit attacks were frequent. He also revealed that during Count Ferdinand's rule, patrols provided protection, but that disappeared after the land changed hands. Since the village paid low taxes, it received little attention. Van understood the system but declared that he came to change their fate. He proposed 3 solutions: creating value the kingdom could not ignore, securing income to hire mercenaries, and directly developing the village. The villagers admitted they had tried before without success. Although Van promised to protect and develop the village, their expressions remained doubtful. At that moment, Espada spoke, confirming that Van had been exceptional since childhood, to the point they called him the prodigy child. Uncle Dai introduced himself as the of the family's knights, which served as a strong guarantee for Van's words. Through their combined reputation, the villagers' trust began to grow gradually, even if it was more because of them than Van himself. After that, the village chief asked about the plan in detail, but when he learned that Van had production magic, silence spread among the people as if their enthusiasm had vanished. One of them expressed concern about taxes. Yet Van declared that he would only take 1/10 of the previous tax because of their difficult conditions. This decision shocked everyone. The first step Van decided on was strengthening the wall surrounding the village. Espada explained that the walls created by his magic would return to dust once the magic faded, but Van accepted it as a temporary solution. With that, Espada activated his magic, raising multiple earth walls within moments. Then Van suggested digging a trench around the village to slow any future attack. Uncle Dai and the knights took on that task, while Van understood that rebuilding the village required everyone's cooperation. Elsewhere, Van entered the forest to gather wood and test his magic. He sensed the mana within his body as he imagined wooden fibers intertwining to form a strange piece of material. When he described it as something like nanofiber, Zio and Cam Shin did not understand what he meant. When Oho examined it, he found it extremely light yet abnormally strong to the point that even striking it with a sword left no mark. By evening, Shio noticed that Van had been using magic all day without exhaustion. Even though production magic usually uses a large amount of mana, Van crafted a katana and gave it to Cam Shin. When Shio asked for a gift, he created an axe perfectly suited for her. During that time, Van realized that everyone was exhausted and that the priority was to provide a comfortable place to live before any further development, so he decided to build a house. The next day, he arranged the wood and asked for a suitable location. El told him he could build anywhere. Then Van used his magic and built a large house before everyone's eyes, leaving them stunned. Although he felt it was somewhat oversized, he mentioned that he could build homes for everyone if enough materials were available. The villagers became excited and began gathering materials, with the adventurers joining them. When the chief asked for help in rebuilding while the residents complained about their ruined homes, Van felt the pressure but decided to build new houses for everyone. This brought great joy. Within a short time, new houses appeared as the old ones were removed, amazing everyone with his power and organized method. Van explained that he used a grid-based layout, where each unit had 4 houses separated by organized paths. All homes were similar to ensure fairness, with plans to upgrade them later when resources became available. The villagers thanked Van and offered him part of their crops, but he continued working and built a simple public bath beside the mansion where water was filled using magic while Cam Shin heated it. Everyone enjoyed it. Even Barl expressed surprise at this level of comfort. At night, Van bathed, followed by Cam Shin. Van noticed he had grown stronger while Cam Shin felt weak compared to Dai. But Van explained that such a comparison was unreasonable. Suddenly, the knights entered the bath carrying their swords, preventing Van from leaving under the excuse of strengthening bonds. This left him slightly annoyed despite feeling relaxed afterward. Next day, they began digging a water canal to serve as both a defensive trench and a daily water source. They brought water from the river, with Espada handling a large portion of the digging while others expanded the canal. Van reinforced the sides using his magic as Dai showed great enthusiasm. Despite the large scale of the project, everyone worked together efficiently and completed much in a short time. But Van stopped them to rest when he noticed their exhaustion. The next day, they resumed work. Once the gate was opened, water rushed in powerfully, bringing joy to everyone. Van then suggested creating a storage lake behind the village. The idea was quickly implemented, forming a large lake that ended the villagers' worries about water. The chief thanked him while Van felt happy to help. Elsewhere, a young girl sat inside a carriage with an arrogant woman as they traveled toward a distant village. Returning to Van, he continued building the wall around the village, and the project was nearing completion. The new wall became far stronger than before, capable of repelling bandits. Van also created defensive crossbows equipped with shields, turning the village into a small fortress. He realized that his abilities alone could have made him valuable to the mayors. Later during a meal, Shio expressed concern about food shortages, while Espada pointed out the need for a stable income. There was no trade and resources were lacking, which pressured Van to consider creating a unique industry for the village. At the same time, the new weapon was tested. When Cam Shin used it, he split armor in half with one strike despite it being wooden, shocking everyone. Van repaired it immediately. Soon after, they discovered copper, silver, gold, and the rare metal mithril, suggesting the land was not fully explored. When Van created an iron sword for the first time, he succeeded quickly. Adventurers began requesting more weapons, which he agreed to provide freely. Espada warned that mithril might indicate a nearby dungeon, increasing both value and danger, so they chose to avoid the area for now. As development continued, a warning came about giant armored lizards approaching. They raised the bridge and sealed the gate. Van declared the battle critical, urging unity while calmly assigning positions on the wall. Although he intended to fight, Zio stopped him, leaving Dai to lead. Despite facing nearly 40 massive lizards, they followed Van's plan, using iron arrows to eliminate many. When the iron arrows ran out, Van suggested wooden ones. Though doubtful, Dai trusted him and they proved effective. This led to victory and relief among everyone. Afterward, Shio embraced Van while the knights acknowledged his strength. They processed the lizards, saving valuable parts and using the meat aided by Van's tools. That evening, they celebrated with Oho's team praising his weapons. Although requests were made for more, Van delayed them. As they realized the value of the lizards, concerns arose about taxes and corruption, making Van worry his father might reclaim the land. Espada suggested informing Emria instead of the Marquis to hide the truth and buy time. The next day, two merchants arrived amazed by the defenses and agreed to buy all the materials, requesting time to prepare. Van accepted, even giving them meat. After seeing his weapons, they agreed to the price without negotiation. He asked them to help promote the village. Instead of monopolizing trade, they agreed to open a shop there, which Van built using his magic, forming a long-term partnership. Elsewhere, a noble girl and a knight arrived. Espada asked Van to design a city for 10,000 people, leading him to propose a star-shaped fortress. The guests introduced themselves as Panamera and Arrows. When asked about his situation, Van explained his exile while Dai and Espada confirmed they followed him willingly. To prove his ability, Van transformed an earth wall into solid form and built a strong gate, shocking them. He explained that this was production magic despite being considered weak. Panamera then proposed a political marriage between Van and Arrows, but he politely refused, stating his goal was to develop the village. She admitted her opinion had changed after seeing his abilities, praising him. When asked, Arrows shyly admitted he was kind, though she had never considered marriage seriously. Van told her to take her time. Panamera decided to stay until the next day. Instead of hosting them in the mansion, Van built a full inn. Later, they shared dinner and Van spoke with Arrows, learning about her love for dolls and flowers. When she felt his genuine interest, she excitedly showed him her collection. Afterward, he escorted them to the inn. As Panamera stepped away to give them space, Arrows gathered her courage, told him he was a good person, then quickly retreated to her room. After that, Van returned to the mansion where Espada noticed that a marriage between a baron's daughter and the ruler of an unknown village usually meant that Arrows did not have elemental magic either. When Van heard that, he suddenly realized that she was just like him, as both had been cast away from their original place. So he decided that if she wished, she could live freely in the village, even without any engagement or marriage. Early the next morning, Tia woke Van quickly because of something strange at the lake. He was surprised to learn that the villagers had named the new lake after him, making him think he had to stop them before they named the entire village after him as well. When he arrived, he found everyone gathered. Tia led him to the source of the commotion where a mermaid was hiding beneath the water. Espada explained that Apollo mermaids usually lived in primitive rivers deep within forests and rarely interacted with humans, making her appearance extremely unusual. Van tried to speak with her, but she did not respond. So he assumed she might not understand human language and instead asked for grilled meat, believing that everyone understands the language of food. When she saw it, she swam closer and asked if she could eat it. After tasting it, she recognized it as armored dragon meat and asked who defeated it. Van was about to say it was everyone's effort, but the villagers insisted that he was the one responsible. Upon hearing that, she showed satisfaction before diving back into the water and disappearing. Van thought he would not see her again, but despite being told that mermaids were shy, the entire tribe appeared the next day in front of his house, leaving him shocked. He assumed they came because of the armored dragon, even wondering briefly if they worshipped it, though Espada denied that and advised him to ask directly. At that moment, the Mermaid King appeared large and imposing, introducing himself as Lavista. He explained that he came to thank Van for treating his daughter kindly. When Van confirmed that he helped defeat the scaled god while stressing it was a group effort, the mermaids whispered in amazement at how a child could do that. The king called Van a hero and declared he would marry his daughter Lotta to him. This shocked Van, who replied honestly that she was still too young and did not understand marriage. When he asked for the reason, the king explained that their tribe avoided humans, but the armored god had recently invaded and killed many of them. So he was willing to marry his daughter to any hero who defeated it. Van understood the situation but refused, explaining there was no need to use marriage as a guarantee of safety and that Lotta should choose for herself when she grows up. He said he would help them simply because he wanted to. After that, the king requested that his tribe settle at the lake and become part of the village. Van agreed immediately, creating 2 floating houses in the center of the lake. This allowed the mermaids to finally feel stable. During that time, the topic of sanitation came up. When Van explained the village layout and underground drainage system, the king showed great interest and offered help as his tribe was highly skilled in water control. With their support, the burden on Van was reduced. The king considered managing the system the least he could do in return for a safe home. At that moment, Arrows and Panamera arrived and were shocked to see the mermaids. Suddenly, the king called Van my son-in-law, thanking him. This left both girls frozen in disbelief. Panamera began to suspect that Van had married a mermaid, especially since Arrows arrived earlier. Before he could explain, Lotta proudly declared herself his wife, increasing the tension between Van and Ows. Van suggested going on a boat ride the next day to clear the misunderstanding, but Arrows replied that she had already heard everything and that there was no misunderstanding, which relieved him. She also praised his achievements in developing the village. Soon after, Lotta returned and seeing Van with another girl became jealous. Many mermaid children gathered around the boat shaking it and calling him their master while asking for meat. Because of the shaking, Arrows accidentally fell onto Van, blushing in embarrassment. Lotta's jealousy grew even more. Van had to repeat that he refused the marriage and that there was no engagement, which made Lotta frown before diving away. Yet the children continued shaking the boat until Arrows held onto Van tightly to keep her balance. Moments later, the Mermaid King appeared with a serious expression and declared that he heard Van was courting another woman despite being married. Although Van denied it, the king ignored his explanation and announced a competition between the two sides. He stated that if the mermaids won, Van must officially accept the marriage. Before Van could respond, Tio accepted the challenge on his behalf, promising victory as the deputy commander. Espada agreed to settle the matter quickly and Panamera supported the idea. Although Van was worried about losing, Tio reassured him and he eventually agreed. The king proposed 3 rounds for fairness, giving Van the right to choose the first game. Instead of picking something favorable, he chose water ball, a game unknown to both sides. He created a field in the lake and explained the rules. Everyone was surprised, especially Espada, who had never heard of it. Panamera noted that the swimwear Van created was perfectly suited. The match began quickly with Panamera and Tio representing Van's side while Lotta and the king played for theirs. From the first move the king scored easily, soon dominating alongside his daughter and creating a large gap. At halftime Tio began to lose hope, but Panamera reminded him of his loyalty, restoring his determination. In the second half they improved, gradually closing the gap until the final moment. Panamera leaped to block the king's shot but failed, and Tio could not reach in time. This allowed the mermaids to win the first round, leaving Tio shaken while Panamera remained strangely optimistic. The king then suggested the second game as a swimming relay race. Van immediately realized the disadvantage for humans in water, yet Tio remained confident and Cam Shin volunteered to participate. The competition began with Lotta and Cam Shin taking the first turn. As expected, Lotta quickly took the lead, swimming freely and diving underwater to increase her speed while Kin pushed himself to keep up. When Kaishin reached the end and handed over to Tio, the situation changed completely. Tio chose the butterfly stroke, one of the most difficult swimming styles, which surprised Van. The knights explained that this technique maximizes muscle strength. Tio surged forward like a speedboat, overtaking the mermaids and winning the race. The Mermaid King could not believe he had lost a swimming race, while Tio was extremely proud, not even noticing that the force of his speed and the water pressure had caused his swimwear to slip off. Still unsatisfied, the king turned to Van and asked him to choose the third game, the final round. After thinking about a fair challenge, Van created an ice shaving device, asked Panamera to freeze the water, then shaved the ice himself and poured sweet syrup over it. At first no one understood until Van announced that the final challenge would be a shaved ice eating contest, and that he would participate as well. The contest was quickly held inside the mermaid's floating house with 4 participants. Once the start was announced, all 4 began eating rapidly, yet none could avoid the intense ice headache. After a difficult struggle, Van and Arrows finished first, winning the decisive round. The king accepted the defeat calmly and Van finally felt relieved to escape the forced marriage. Yet the king still called him my son-in-law, claiming he had proven himself even more worthy before leaving. Van was confused about the meaning of the entire contest. Shortly after, Van suffered severe stomach pain from eating too much ice. At that time Panamera praised Arrows for her effort while Arrows stood quietly watching Van surrounded by his loyal companions. This made her wonder why she had never received such care and affection. Since childhood she had been neglected. Her father was always busy with work and her mother left her to a maid. Over time her shy nature caused her to be overlooked and seen as weak. Her only strength was puppet magic, allowing her to control dolls with precision. But when she tried to impress her mother she was rejected and cast aside. In noble society, puppet magic was not only considered useless but even seen as dark magic, isolating her completely. When she turned 10, her father sent her to marry the lord of an unknown village, filling her with fear. Yet Van was nothing like she expected. He was kind, confident, and loved by everyone. Despite possessing magic that others deemed useless, watching him now, she decided to train her puppet magic seriously, hoping one day to be recognized for her true abilities. The next day Van gathered the villagers to begin a new construction project, encouraging them with the promise of a large barbecue feast at night. At that moment Arrows approached him asking to work with him because she wanted to become like him. He accepted happily. At the same time an unknown threat was pursuing a group called Otto and putting them in danger. After completing the wall project that Van had proposed, the village expanded rapidly within just 2 weeks. The wall became much stronger and the defense system improved greatly. Panamera was shocked by the scale and speed of development. Van found himself slightly distracted by her appearance. Panamera held a clear ambition to obtain land of her own, seeking to achieve military success that could grant her such an opportunity in the future. When Panamera saw a strange device in front of her, she asked about it. Van explained that it was a spear launcher developed from an older model he had made before. Then he asked Kamshin to test it. The strike was extremely powerful, astonishing her. When she learned that there were more than 100 of these devices on the wall, she immediately wanted to buy them at any cost, but Van refused. When she insisted, he asked instead for a favor to be returned in the future. Then he questioned how she would transport such a heavy device and prepare the spears. She replied that she would use a carriage and could forge iron spears herself. But Cam Shin advised her to first buy 1 or 2 of Van's spears to understand the difference. To prove it, Cam Shin drew his sword and suggested testing it on something else. Although Panamera said his sword looked ordinary, she brought out her spare blade and declared that breaking it would be a real achievement. When Cam Shin swung his sword, she felt no impact. Yet moments later, she was shocked to see her blade split cleanly in half. He explained that the sword had been crafted and refined by Van from ordinary metal. The spears used by the launcher were made the same way, yet strong enough to pierce through 2 or 3 armored scale lizards in a single strike. This left Panamera even more amazed and eager to purchase more, allowing Van to take advantage of the situation with his natural sense for trade. At that moment, Otto's team returned to the village in panic, chased by a massive dragon. Otto asked everyone to retreat while they distracted it, but Van refused to let them sacrifice themselves. Hanamura offered to help, realizing the dragon's arrival was inevitable. Van thanked her and ordered the beast to be drawn toward the spear launcher zone. Hanamura took command and declared full readiness for battle, explaining that they were facing a mid-level forest dragon. Van apologized to Arrows for frightening her while assuring her that with the improved launchers they had a chance, even nodding they could defeat it with the older version. Then he ordered Tio to stay and protect her while calling Tio's men as reinforcements. As they approached the gate, Van realized that flying enemies posed the greatest threat to any village. Sarah attempted to draw the dragon's attention, which immediately chased her, forcing her to act as bait while ordering the others to retreat. Otto also tried provoking it to divert its focus. Van ordered a second volley from the launchers, but it failed to deliver a decisive blow. Hanamura declared she would begin her attack to restrict its movement, launching a massive fireball that struck the dragon with a powerful explosion. Yet it rose again, proving far stronger than the armored lizards. When it spread its wings and took to the air, the launchers fired again, this time piercing one of its wings. Van ordered another volley, but the dragon dodged with terrifying speed. Otto's team finally reached the base of the wall and felt a moment of relief. Yet Van realized the danger was far from over as Panamura continued buying time with another fireball, which the dragon initially avoided before it changed direction midair and struck it. This forced it to fall and gave them a chance to retreat. But the creature rose again, leaped over the wall and destroyed one of the launchers. Mid the chaos, Van noticed Espada advancing toward the dragon and immediately ordered him to retreat because of the danger. But Espada continued forward and used earth element magic to raise a massive wall, causing the ground to tremble as solid masses of earth collapsed and buried the dragon beneath them. Van was amazed by the power of the attack and ordered everyone to retreat quickly inside the village. Espada withdrew calmly, remarking that running might harm his bones and that the long path could exhaust the team. At that moment, Van realized they needed to buy more time or the dragon would cause massive destruction. Fortunately, Panamera declared that she was ready. Van seized the moment to claim the favor she owed him. As the dragon rose and at that moment, Tio appeared with 2 of his men and charged toward the dragon at incredible speed. When Van wondered if 3 were enough, Tio confirmed they had the right weapon and would not struggle. They attacked directly, but the dragon countered with its claws and launched a fierce assault. Although the 2 knights tried to support him, they were struck and thrown aside, forcing Espada to quickly intervene and raise a massive earth wall to protect them. After buying enough time, Panamera unleashed a decisive attack, a massive fireball that exploded upon impact. This forced Tio and his men to retreat quickly to avoid being burned. Yet the dragon remained standing within the flames. At that exact moment, all spear launchers fired simultaneously and the spears pierced its body. As the flames faded, Tio approached to confirm the kill, but the dragon suddenly opened its jaws to bite him. In a split second, he dodged and delivered a decisive strike, cutting off its head. The village erupted in cheers and joy as Arrows and Tio rushed toward Van to check on him. He reassured them that everything had gone according to plan. Panamera congratulated him on his leadership, nodding that the victory was achieved because of him, though he insisted that the credit belonged to everyone. Soon after, a celebration ceremony began in the village where Van announced that they had defeated a dragon and that it was time to honor those who contributed. He invited Panamera to speak. She stated that a single dragon could destroy a village or even an entire city. Yet this village not only survived but did so without casualties, with damage limited to part of the wall and 2 launchers. She began naming those responsible. First D, who delivered the final blow, then Espada for his mastery of earth magic, and finally Van, the 4th son of the Vedi family who led with wisdom beyond his age, used magic innovatively, strengthened defenses rapidly, and took full responsibility as a ruler. As Van felt embarrassed by the praise, Hanamura looked at him and recalled her own long journey towards status. She realized that despite meeting many people, she had never encountered someone like him. Her thoughts drifted to the past. She had been born in the capital within a traditional knight family, showed talent in magic early, and was sent to a higher training ground. By the age of 16, she became the commander of the regional knights, eventually earning the title of Viscount from the king in recognition of her achievements. Years later, Count Ferdinand requested to meet Panamera and asked her to accompany his youngest daughter Arrows to marry the ruler of a distant land. When Panamera met her, she found her extremely frightened, believing her family had abandoned her. Panamera understood part of her feelings, but explained that she was the only one among her siblings who had not yet been engaged. She assured her that if she did not want the marriage, she would personally help her refuse it. Then she advised her not to worry and only hope to meet someone kind, as she herself had felt the same fear when she left her home in the past. But after meeting Van, Panemura realized that Aros no longer had anything to fear. The shy girl began to open up and move forward beside him, feeling a kind of energy she had never experienced before. Because of that, Panemura declared before everyone her intention to form an alliance with Van. She explained that the previous ruler had not provided real support, but this alliance would guarantee protection from any future invasion. Van immediately understood that this alliance was the best choice, not only for security but also for the economic gains it would bring. Panemura emphasized that he should aim for greater goals as he had already transformed a small village into something advanced in a short time. With this alliance, the nobles of the kingdom would recognize his political connection to her. Van thought that as someone abandoned by his father, and without standing among nobles, this was a rare opportunity. So he accepted the alliance gladly. The next day Van sat with Espada, discussing the village's future. Espada explained that the wall had proven its effectiveness in the dragon battle, and that it was time to focus on planning and development. Van agreed, recalling his idea of building a city for 10,000 people. Espada confirmed that the goal was reasonable and suggested attracting new residents. At that moment, Tio entered, informing them that two merchant brothers had arrived with members of the trade guild. Van became eager to receive them and decided to start by selling the dragon parts. The merchants explained that a forest dragon was extremely rare and valuable, with profits reaching around 100 platinum coins. However, during inspection, the older merchants exchanged glances and whispered. When Van asked for their opinion, they offered to buy everything, claiming no one else could offer better but proposed a low price of 60 platinum coins. Van told them he would consult the two brothers before deciding, which made the older merchants uneasy. They pulled the brothers aside, urging them to cooperate, saying they all belonged to the same guild and should maximize profit. The brothers refused, insisting that a true merchant must offer a fair price, but the older merchants ignored them, believing Van would eventually accept because of lack of options. They grew angry, threatened to expel them from the guild, and left. Van asked the brothers if expulsion was possible. They admitted there was a high chance the administration would side with the older merchants, which could ruin their reputation. At that point, Van suggested they establish their own trade guild, surprising them. They explained the requirements: paying registration fees, owning a shop, and most importantly having noble sponsorship. Van immediately went to Panemura and asked for her support. She agreed to sponsor them. He expressed concern about conflict with a powerful guild backed by the royal family, but she reassured him that such a large institution would not care about a small noble supporting a small guild. She also saw it as an opportunity to build a positive reputation by supporting honest merchants. Van suggested that she claim credit for slaying the dragon to gain fame and protect himself from his family discovering the truth. But she refused immediately, explaining that such an achievement would be investigated and the truth would surface. Van grew worried that discovery might lead to him being summoned and losing the village. Panemura explained that the only way to avoid that was to gain an independent noble title. She noted that titles could be inherited or earned. As the son of Amaris, he could request the title of Baron from the king if he declared himself the Dragon Slayer. She added that she had faced many enemies when she gained her title but overcame them. She even advised him that if anyone tried to harm them, he should respond with force using the spear launchers, a harsh but effective method. Van understood her words and felt he had learned a way to survive, even if the idea seemed intimidating. After that, he returned to the brothers and told them that Panemura would sponsor them. Although they were initially shocked, they soon became overjoyed at the chance to establish their own guild. They purchased all the dragon parts for 130 platinum coins, far higher than previous estimates, and began preparing to transport the goods to the capital. However, a problem arose when the older merchants seized all transport wagons, leaving the brothers without a way to move their goods. As they struggled to find a solution, Van offered to build a new wagon for them. At that moment, Panemura appeared and allowed them to use her own carriages. The older merchants laughed with confidence, believing the two brothers would return to them once they failed to find transport. But they were shocked when Panemura passed before them with a new carriage. They realized that the brothers would indeed establish an independent guild under her sponsorship. Shortly after, Panemura traveled to the royal capital to meet King Dino, who welcomed her warmly and asked if she sought a new promotion. She explained that her visit was to request a noble title for a friend who protected a distant village and could not leave it. When the king asked about his identity, she told him it was Van, the youngest son of the Vedi family ruler who had defeated a forest dragon. This surprised everyone in the court, as the king had assumed Van was a powerful elemental mage. But Panemura clarified that he only had production magic and was no older than 8. She then recounted his achievements. Upon arriving at the village, he found it under attack and with a small group of knights and adventurers repelled the bandits. Then he used his magic to transform the ruined village into a strong fortress and afterward defeated the forest dragon. The king was impressed. Panemura presented a dragon fang as proof, inviting him to visit the village himself. She assured him that seeing the results firsthand would confirm everything and perhaps even justify granting additional land, which pleased the king. He ultimately decided to grant Van the title of Baron. Hanamura spread the news among the people, and soon everyone began talking about Van's achievements. Meanwhile, Van continued developing the area, building new houses to give it the appearance of a bustling city. He constructed 2 tall towers inside the walls to strengthen surveillance and defense. While sitting with his companions atop one of them, they observed everything they had accomplished. During that time, Espada pointed out that the place now deserved to be called a city rather than a village, suggesting the name Van City. But Van refused, not wanting to turn his name into a symbol. Even though the others liked the idea, they then enjoyed cakes prepared by Tio using ingredients from the brothers' shop, which had grown rich in resources after establishing their guild. At that moment, Kamshin noticed a group at the gate. When Van went to check, he found thin refugees asking about a place called Satato. Espada explained that this was the old name of the village, though not officially adopted. When Van asked why they had come, they said they were from a nearby village suffering from heavy taxes and labor shortages due to military conscription. After hearing about the rapid development here, they came seeking help, revealing they belonged to Count Ferdinand's lands. Unable to ignore their condition, Van decided to accept them as new residents. He assured them they would not worry about taxes at first, and that he would provide housing and enough food. This left them shocked, wondering if this place was like paradise. Their leader explained they were about 300 people. Van arranged for adventurers to escort them and prepared transport for their belongings. When they mentioned having 10 cows, Van felt pleased, seeing an opportunity to develop dairy production. Soon after, Otto and the adventurers returned safely with all the refugees. Although some questioned why Van helped without reward, Barl told them to focus on work, and everyone began assisting the newcomers. Otto spoke with an exhausted woman who admitted she had feared leaving her home, but he reassured her that this new place was like paradise. Upon arrival, Van organized a welcoming barbecue where the refugees were overwhelmed by the quality of the food, with many moved to tears. After eating, they asked about work opportunities, fearing they might be expelled otherwise. But Van reassured them they could work in the new shops or in farming, while experienced workers would handle more complex tasks. At that moment, the old village chief spoke, saying life had improved greatly since Van's arrival, and that they wanted the newcomers to benefit as well. Then Van offered sweets made from cow's milk, explaining that their lives would continue improving as the village grew into a true city. For the first time, they felt they were not living merely to survive, but to begin a new life. As major construction projects ended, life became calmer with improved roads and houses making the place more beautiful. During that time, Espada noted that it was time for Van to return to focusing on his studies after neglecting them for a while. But at that moment, Otto and his team appeared with tense expressions, apologizing as they reported discovering a dungeon entrance near the village. This alarmed everyone. Espada stressed the need to inform the capital immediately, as such news would attract adventurers and bring chaos and might even reach Van's father, leading to him being summoned back. Van realized that hiding the matter was impossible. Since Sarah had discovered the dungeon, he assigned her to travel to the capital to report it, gifting her a sword made from the rare metal mithril, which delighted her while leaving others slightly envious. After things settled, everyone set out toward the capital. Along the way, Sarah encountered an overturned carriage surrounded by massive beasts, yet despite the danger, he charged forward with his new sword and fought them all, defeating them quickly. After the battle ended, a girl emerged from hiding. She was impressed by his skill and assumed he was a famous adventurer, but he replied humbly that he was just a traveler. After thanking him, she planned to continue to the capital on foot. Yet he offered to accompany her since they shared the same destination and let her ride with him. She told him that her father had been a baron but was killed in a conflict. Afterward, their land was taken from her, causing her to lose both her title and her home. She intended to go to the capital to work as a servant for a noble family. Sarah reassured her that she did not have to follow that path and suggested she come live in the city, explaining that it was developing rapidly and offered work opportunities and strong protection. Meanwhile, Van began planning for the future. With the discovery of the dungeon, it was certain that adventurers would begin to gather, which would change the peaceful nature of the area. So he decided to build a small city near the dungeon to regulate movement and maintain order, assigning a Spatada to oversee it. The project began immediately and progressed quickly. According to Van's estimation, the new city would be completed in about a month. Soon after, Sarah returned to the city accompanied by a girl. When Van asked her name, she politely introduced herself as Flamria, explaining that Sarah had saved her from creatures called Oros during the journey. From their interaction, Van sensed feelings between them, so he smiled and welcomed her as a resident, especially as the city continued to expand. At that moment, a large group of adventurers on horseback approached the city, causing Van to feel tense at first, thinking something had gone wrong. But Sarah reassured him that they were simply adventurers coming to explore the dungeon. Van realized that this marked the beginning of a new phase of activity. The adventurers appeared rough with sharp features and loud voices, but this proved to be only an outer impression. Their behavior was chaotic at first, yet after Josh dealt with them firmly, they became more respectful toward the townspeople. Many were surprised that Van was only 8 years old yet had become a ruler managing a successful city. Shortly after, O and his team returned. When they saw Flemria, Otto asked Sarah about her, learning that she was the girl he had rescued. Oho understood the situation, showing slight annoyance that he had not been the one to do it first. Then Van asked Blurl about the dungeon area. She explained that the surroundings did not have many monsters, but the environment was extremely harsh, making permanent construction difficult. This is why adventurers relied on temporary tents, though she noted that Van's abilities could make building there possible, and expressed interest in having him construct facilities near the dungeon. Van tried to avoid the request, citing his responsibilities in protecting the city, but Burl reassured him that she and the others would handle protection and that Espada was strong enough to manage things. Even when Van attempted to set difficult conditions to discourage her, she accepted all of them and declared that work would begin the next day. This left him surprised as his attempt to withdraw had failed. The next day Van had to ride a carriage toward the dungeon. The road was rough and full of holes, causing violent shaking. Along the way a massive dragon appeared, but the adventurers cooperated and defeated it quickly, celebrating their victory. Although Van was initially annoyed, he calmed down when he saw the excitement of Tio and arrows. Later, Van suddenly ordered a stop as a deep valley stood before them with only 2 wooden planks forming a fragile bridge. While the adventurer saw no issue being used to danger, Van recognized the risk. He ordered the adults to kneel and reflect on their recklessness, then used production magic to build a strong and safe bridge, allowing everyone to cross safely. Upon reaching the dungeon area, Van began executing his plan. First, he built a massive gate to prevent monsters from escaping. Then he constructed a luxurious inn where adventurers could rest after battles. He turned the area into an organized hub around the dungeon in preparation for a new stage of development. The new structure amazed the adventurers. As the sun set, Van remembered the curfew, handed over management, and returned. While Eros noticed Mythen ore in the ground, and after confirming it, Van praised her observation. But upon returning they found Espada waiting, creating tension as Van feared his reaction. Without interference, Espada calmly took him inside. After that, Van went on a walk with Arrows. When she noticed the village's growth, she asked about the people's happiness. He asked if she wished to live there, assuring her there was no pressure. She admitted she truly wanted to be with him. After several days, the merchants returned, announcing the success of their guild and delivering profits. They also mentioned that Panamera planned to claim nearby land. They brought Van a mechanical crossbow, which excited him, leading him to study and recreate a similar design using his magic. Arrows noticed his focus on the weapon more than money. He admitted that his magic was his greatest asset. While she said she had no special ability, he encouraged her to train. When she revealed her puppet magic, considered weak by others, he saw its uniqueness and encouraged her to use it. When she animated a doll, he was impressed and confirmed its great potential. He suggested using it for performances. Although she hesitated, he encouraged her by reminding her that his magic had also been underestimated before proving its value, so she agreed to try. That evening, Van gathered the people in a theater and presented Arrows' performance. As the doll moved, the audience was amazed, but some recalled negative uses of such magic in the past, unsettling her and causing her to stop. At that moment, Van stepped in, calming the crowd and reassuring her. Remembering his support, she regained her confidence and made the doll dance with graceful human-like movements, increasing the audience's admiration. After the performance, she bowed shyly, surprised by the applause. When Van congratulated her, she embraced him gratefully. The next day, Cam Shin informed Van of a large procession at the gate. When he went out, he found many people along with Panamera. Suddenly, King Dino appeared. The king announced Van's promotion to a noble rank and asked for his service to the kingdom, while also wanting to verify his achievements personally. Van agreed to explain everything. He guided them through the village, showcasing defenses and crossbow systems. When one weapon was tested, its power amazed them. He explained the star-shaped fortress design that allowed multi-directional attacks. Panamera commented on its strength, and Van noted he was still improving defense against aerial threats. The king was surprised by the speed of construction, and Van explained that everyone had worked hard despite the short time. Then they went to the lake where the king noticed how naturally people interacted with Van, which surprised him. There they encountered fish-like beings, astonishing them while their leader welcomed the king. Soon after, a rare metal appeared and Van used his magic quickly, raising doubts about his abilities. When questioned, he revealed the truth and asked to remain in the village, which the king allowed under the condition of cooperation. Suddenly, news of an attack arrived and Van ordered everyone to prepare. But it turned out the creature was not a real dragon but something controlled, leading the king to suspect the involvement of the kingdom of Ida. Elsewhere, a prince from the kingdom of Ilanada led the attack, complaining about the mission. Upon arrival, instead of a village, he found a fortified stronghold. When they attempted to break through the gate, they failed. Then Van appeared and asked their purpose, revealing they were from Ida. When the prince threatened an aerial attack, Van used a new weapon and brought him down instantly, shocking everyone. When they realized the king was present, tension spread among them. Van asked if they intended to continue fighting. So everyone surrendered except the prince. But Panamera warned him, forcing him to surrender. In the end, the king and his advisor acknowledged that Van was an exceptional figure, and decided to reconsider the entire magic system. After the prince was captured, he confessed that a long-prepared invasion plan existed, and that this attack was merely a prelude to a larger assault targeting another important city. Upon learning this, they chose to act quickly. The king asked Van to accompany him. Although he hesitated because he did not want to leave his village, he understood the importance of the situation, explaining that his work was not yet finished. But Panamera reminded him of his noble duties, leading him to agree. Before departing, he appointed a Spadata to manage the village temporarily and requested that Dai and the knights accompany them. Despite his concern over their limited numbers, Dee reassured him. When another group offered to join, Van promised them a generous reward, surprising everyone. He explained that those who risk their lives deserve fair compensation, which made Oho thank him and confirmed that many would be eager to join. As for Sarah, she complained, feeling forced into it. But Van told her the mission was only reconnaissance and that if she refused, she would miss the barbecue, causing her to agree immediately. Meanwhile, Panamera announced that she would return to inform Count Ferdinand and gather the army. Van struggled to choose a suitable weapon as the large bow was difficult to transport, until Arrows suggested bringing the Mithrin puppet he had created for her. Before departure, Van explained that this was the first mission for his knights and that their objective was to protect the city of Squeedo. While the enemy consisted of the Knights of Edida, yet he reassured them they would not be on the front lines and that his main goal was for everyone to return safely. Elsewhere, Count Jabba was shocked by attack on Scudido as he had believed it to be an invincible fortress. Yet his army suffered heavy losses due to a new weapon and wyvern monsters. The wyverns began dropping bombs from the sky, causing the collapse of his forces. Before he could react, he faced a sudden assault but barely survived after the attacker withdrew. Soon after, the wyverns headed toward the western gate, where they were met by the Mythin puppet controlled by Arrows. She quickly shot them down, astonishing the mages controlling them, who then redirected all their forces toward that side. Arrows demonstrated remarkable control over the puppet, bringing down more monsters and surprising everyone with her strength as the rapid fall of Scudido seemed unbelievable. At that moment, Van decided to draw the enemy toward himself to allow the Knights of Scuteria to retreat safely, then ordered a withdrawal. Some were confused, believing victory was possible, but Van insisted that the most important thing was everyone returning alive and that victory held no value if lives were lost. At the same time, Count Jabba began reorganizing his forces in preparation for a counterattack. Soon, reinforcements arrived and the King of Scuteria appeared personally. Jabba informed him of Scudido's fall and the new weapon that had destroyed his army. But unexpectedly, the wyverns suddenly changed direction and headed west, leading the king to assume they were drawn toward Van's forces. Aberta explained the rapid development Van had achieved in his village, mentioning that he had slain a dragon and gained a noble title despite his young age. Jabba initially found this hard to believe, though he could not doubt the king or the advisor. When the king noticed Emria's reaction, he asked if he felt jealous of his brother's achievements, but Mia denied it and expressed pride in what Van had accomplished. That night, Van and his forces set up camp in a nearby forest. When asked about his next step, he admitted uncertainty, believing he had fulfilled his duty as a noble. Yet he explained that failing to reclaim Scudido would leave the threat too close. Arrows remarked that this was her first time witnessing war and began to understand how terrifying it was. Van understood her feelings, but reminded her that they were still cooperating with Panamera and needed to provide support. After some thought, Van decided to develop a new weapon, a catapult for launching stones, allowing them to support the army from a safe distance without engaging directly. Arrows showed great excitement at the idea. At first, Van planned to build 20 fixed catapults and 5 mobile ones, but after reconsidering, he realized transporting them to Scuido would be difficult due to the poor roads. So he changed his plan and decided to construct them directly on the battlefield using production magic. After that, he set out to deliver the new weapon, fully aware that it meant returning to the atmosphere of war. Upon arriving at a nearby city, he found a massive number of soldiers, indicating that Scuteria was reorganizing its forces after the defeat. There he met his father Galalia, who was shocked to learn that he had become a baron and slain a dragon, yet he could not believe it had been done using ballista. Soon after, Panamera informed Van that the king was waiting for him, agreeing to demonstrate the weapon to Galia. Later in the royal hall, the king announced his plan to reclaim Scudido. Abietta explained that the defeat was caused by monsters and black spheres, and without solving those threats, victory would be impossible. Galia confirmed that the weapon had been a nightmare on the battlefield. When Van was asked about his plan, he simply stated that they needed to eliminate the monsters quickly before the black spheres could be used. This seemed naive to many, but the king and Abietta considered it seriously and asked him to fight on the front lines. Yet he refused, preferring to act as support to avoid unnecessary risk. This angered those present and Galia rebuked him harshly. Van explained that his priority was protecting his small village and that Alanada might attack border regions. This created tension in the hall. Despite objections, he insisted he could contribute from the rear by preparing ballista and catapults. This reassured the king and Abietta to some extent, though it only increased Galia's anger. At that moment, Van demonstrated his magic before them, creating ballista and catapults within moments, astonishing everyone. Yet Galia refused to accept what he saw and left. Van explained that the catapults would be used to bring down the wyverns, so the king decided to rely on him and ordered preparations for war to begin. Soon, preparations were underway as Van cooperated with Thompson to organize the artillery unit with everyone's support. Panamera emphasized that this battle was decisive and that Van's weapons could change its outcome. When the battle began, Van focused on a single objective, eliminating the wyverns first. As Thompson and Panamera took their positions, Ortho assigned roles and Dai secured the artillery, despite his hesitation. Van advanced to Scuido and once again encountered his father Galba, who remained unconvinced of his strength. He then met the king, who was preparing to reclaim the city. Van repeated his proposal to quickly eliminate the wyverns, which drew the king's attention. Yet he maintained his stance of not fighting on the front lines, preferring a support role, sparking further debate before the king intervened. He once again stressed that his goal was to protect his village, and that Alanita could strike it. So he chose to support from behind, and the king agreed. After which Van began producing weapons at incredible speed, astonishing everyone. As the battle unfolded, these weapons successfully brought down the wyverns, shifting the tide of the fight until victory was achieved. However, it soon became clear that another assault was targeting multiple regions. Elsewhere, Artie rushed to defend her land only to find it completely destroyed. Though she and the adventurers tried to stop the disaster, they could do nothing but watch. Her daughter could not hold back her tears as she saw her city collapse. Yet Sharon told her to remain composed, attempting to ease the situation in a harsh manner, stating that in the end, it should appear as though the eldest daughter had died with honor, as befitted a noble. Despite the severity of the moment, Sharon held her daughter and told her not to worry, though she could not stop thinking about Artie, her younger daughter. On the other side, the enemy commander declared that the Ferdinand territory could not withstand the army of Alanita and ordered its immediate occupation. The soldiers raised their swords, convinced that victory was within reach. But suddenly one of the wyverns fell from the sky, completely destroyed. A soldier reported the presence of a silver knight attacking the wyverns, yet in reality, it was the Mithrin marionette controlled by Artie. From her position, she controlled the puppet with precision, coordinating its movements to eliminate wyverns with clean, decisive strikes. The soldiers of Alanita were stunned, unable to comprehend how so many wyverns had been destroyed so quickly. Then the commander was informed that the flag of the Ferdinand family had appeared on the hill. Upon seeing Artie and the adventurers, he assumed Scuido had sent reinforcements. He immediately ordered a change of target and directed the army toward the hill. When asked about the Silver Knight, he dismissed it as irrelevant after neutralizing the main force, ordering the entire army to advance. Zara reported that the enemy was heading toward them and already understood that this would not be as easy as Van's battles, as she was still inexperienced and her hands trembled. Despite that, she refused to retreat, requested support from Ortho, and called upon all adventurers to help save her land. When Ortho asked about her plan, she suddenly declared that she would advance to the front lines herself. Artie rushed to the front lines without waiting for a reply, and immediately controlled her marionette to confront the army of Alanata directly. Its movements were so fast and powerful that the enemy could not even perceive it. Ortho did not hesitate and charged after her, followed by the adventurers. With their speed and weapon strength, they dominated the battlefield as the enemy could not match their pace. At a critical moment, Zara found himself surrounded. Artie intervened instantly, ordering the marionette to shield him. Even when one of its arms was destroyed, it continued moving, striking fear into the soldiers who believed someone was fighting inside the armor. She used their confusion to eliminate them at once. Zara thanked her as the battle continued. After intense combat, they secured the area. But suddenly Bloral announced that the battle was not over. An entire force of Alanita mages appeared in the sky, commanding nearly 50 wyverns. The enemy commander revealed he had anticipated such resistance and had already called for reinforcements, ordering the wyverns to attack the Silver Knight. Ortho warned everyone of the danger, but Artie continued fighting and brought down the first wave. Yet, the overwhelming numbers quickly surrounded her. At that moment, a second marionette appeared, revealing that she was controlling two at once. Despite knowing her magical energy would not last, she focused and issued commands to both. They struck with precision, bringing down many wyverns in rapid succession. She remembered her past when she had seen herself as a failure because puppet magic was rejected. She had sworn never to use it again, but Van gave her confidence and restored her belief in herself. With determination, she fought on, eliminating half the wyverns in moments. This enraged the enemy commander, who ordered the remaining forces to attack with full strength. Yet Artie refused to retreat and declared she would protect what mattered to her, even with a magic others deemed weak. In the end, she destroyed the last wyvern. The army of Ilanetta collapsed, fleeing in terror. Ortho raised his sword to declare victory as the adventurers celebrated a flawless win without casualties. Artie looked at her Mithrin marionettes and stated that the victory was achieved through them. She approached the first one and apologized for forcing it to fight until it was damaged and lost an arm, expressing her gratitude for saving her homeland. At the same time, Sharon and her daughter observed everything from the Ferdinand Palace, relieved that the enemy had been driven away yet unaware of who saved them. After searching, Count Ferdinand found them and expressed his happiness for their safety. When his daughter asked about reinforcements, he explained that the army of Alanata had been defeated by only 2 marionettes. He added that he had seen a young girl with white hair leading the battle. Sharon was stunned. When she confirmed the truth, she broke down in tears. The Count admitted his regret, reflecting on the irony of having cast Artie aside in the past. Elsewhere, Zara asked Artie if she would return home after the battle. She refused, saying her return might cause trouble for her family. Although others tried to persuade her, explaining that people would rejoice in the truth, she remained uncertain, especially knowing her mother despised her magic. So she chose to return to Seto, where Van awaited her. Thus she left her homeland without seeing her family despite having saved it. When she returned, Van and the people of Seto welcomed her warmly. She admitted she still saw herself as inferior to him in leadership and felt like a failure. But he reassured her, affirming that she was strong in her own way and encouraging her to develop her style. She was moved by his words, smiling sincerely as he welcomed her home. After that, Sito continued to develop under Van's guidance. He used production magic to construct shops and modern inns, transforming the once poor village into a thriving city. As he walked with Artie, he showed her the progress, explaining his goal of giving everyone a comfortable life. The settlement became a vibrant community where trade flourished and adventurers supported the residents. Van noticed the harmony among everyone despite their differences. So he decided to hold a grand celebration to unite them. During the festival, laughter and food filled the place as a comedic argument broke out between Zara and Ortho. Laurel continued drinking without concern. Van watched the scene with happiness, recalling his past life and how he had been cast out because of his magic. Yet here he had found friends and a new life. He felt deep gratitude for everyone around him. Suddenly, Espada interrupted him, reminding him of his study schedule. Dai declared he would train him to become the greatest knight. Espada insisted he must become the greatest scholar. Van shouted in refusal and ran away through the celebration as everyone cheered him on. Zara urged him to run faster before he was caught. As he ran, he looked around and saw how much the village had changed. Remembering its beginnings, he realized it had become his true home. He recalled how they overcame armored lizards with only a few arrows, and how Panamera helped them defeat the forest dragon, earning him his first title. He understood that everyone he met contributed to his success. Every experience shaped what the village had become. With these thoughts, Van finally stopped, filled with determination. He decided to face everyone and declare his resolve to continue developing this place into a better future for all.